Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Theresa May due to speak in the House of Commons in a very short time on EU citizens' rights, but we can take you to the House of Commons now. Speaker John Bercow currently talking about the cyber attack that hit MPs over the weekend.
It is self-evident that this has been achieved, and I am sure colleagues will join me in thanking all of those parliamentary staff who have worked intensively over the past few days to ensure that our parliamentary democracy can operate freely. On Thursday last, I informed the House about arrangements for the election of deputy speakers. Nominations are due tomorrow and the ballot will be held on Wednesday morning. I thought it would be helpful to all members if I informed the House now, rather than late tomorrow afternoon when nominations close, that I have decided after consultation with the clerks and in the light of technical advice from the Electoral Reform Society, who are the House's advisers on ballots, that if, and I stress if, there is only one candidate from the Conservative side of the House, and there are more than two candidates from the other side, the name of the sole Conservative candidate will not be on the ballot paper and will be declared in due course as elected as First Deputy Chairman of Ways and Means, in much the same way as happens when there is an unopposed candidate for the chair of a select committee. I hope that this will help members in all parts of the House to deal with the perceived complexities of the STV system to which we are bound by the standing orders. If, I recognise that this is in the realms of conjecture, colleagues are in any way puzzled by its operation, they are welcome to seek advice from the Public Bill Office or the Library, or indeed Wikipedia. Order. Statement, the Prime Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on last week's European Council and the proposals we are publishing today, which, on a reciprocal basis, seek to give reassurance and certainty to EU citizens who have made their homes and lives in our country. Mr. Speaker, this Council followed the formal start of the negotiations for the United Kingdom's departure from the EU, as well as marking the first anniversary of the referendum that led to that decision. In that referendum, the British people chose to take back control of our laws, our money and our borders, to restore supremacy to this Parliament and to reclaim our sense of national self-determination. And this government will fulfil the democratic will of the British people. But Mr. Speaker, the referendum was not a vote to turn our backs on our friends and neighbours. Indeed, as we become ever more internationalist in our outlook and as we build the global Britain we want to see, we will continue to be reliable partners, willing allies and close friends with all member states of the European Union. We want to work with one another to make sure we are all safer, more secure and more prosperous through our continued friendship. We want to buy each other's goods and services and trade as freely as possible. And we will continue to celebrate and defend the liberal democratic values that we share and to project those values that are the foundation of our freedoms and our way of life. In short, we want to build what I have described as a new, deep and special partnership between a confident, self-governing global Britain and all our friends and allies in the European Union. Mr. Speaker, that is the positive and constructive spirit in which my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, began the formal negotiations last week. And it is the same spirit in which the United Kingdom made a full contribution to all the issues at this Council, including on security, migration, climate change and trade. On security, I thanked our European partners for their condolences and for their resolve in standing with us following the appalling terrorist attacks that the UK has suffered in recent weeks. Those attacks have seen citizens from across Europe tragically killed and injured, but they have also seen our citizens standing together in some of the most inspiring ways. At London Bridge, we saw a Spanish banker tragically killed as he rushed to the aid of a woman being attacked. And we saw a Romanian baker fighting off the terrorists and giving shelter to Londoners in his bakery. These moments of heroism show how, far from dividing us, such attacks on our way of life will only ever serve to strengthen our shared unity and resolve. But, Mr. Speaker, these attacks also show that we need to respond to a new trend in the threat we face, as terrorism breeds terrorism, and perpetrators are inspired to attack by copying one another using the crudest of means. So, building on the bilateral agreement I reached with President Macron earlier this month, at this Council, I argued that we must come together to defeat the hateful and extremist ideologies that inspire these attacks, and to stop the internet being used as a safe space for extremists. When 1/3 of all links to Daesh propaganda are shared within the first hour of release, it is not enough for technology companies to respond reactively to extremist content on their platforms. So the Council agreed to put pressure on these companies to do more to remove this content automatically, and also to ensure that law enforcement agencies can access encrypted data. This was a significant step forward, and we will continue to work together with our European partners to combat this evil, to defend our values, and to keep our citizens safe. Turning to other issues, on migration, the Council recommitted to the comprehensive approach that the UK has advocated, dealing with the drivers of migration while also doing more to stem the flow. And at this summit, I confirmed a new UK commitment of £75 million to meet urgent humanitarian needs in the central Mediterranean, while also facilitating voluntary returns of migrants making these treacherous journeys. On trade, as the UK leaves the European Union, we will be forging trade deals around the world with old friends and new allies alike. But this will not undermine the EU's trade agenda. It is not even in competition with it. So for as long as we remain part of the EU, we will continue to press for an ambitious trade agenda that can deliver jobs and growth across the continent. And that is what I did at this Council, where there was a particular focus on the work towards deals with Japan, Mexico and the Mercosur bloc of South American countries. And on climate change, the Council reaffirmed the commitment of all Member States to fully implement the Paris Agreement. The UK has already reaffirmed its own commitment, and I've expressed my disappointment to President Trump that he has taken a different decision. We will continue to make the case to our American allies to think again. Mr. Speaker, turning to citizens' rights, EU citizens make an invaluable contribution to our United Kingdom, to our economy, our public services and our everyday lives. They are an integral part of the economic, cultural and social fabric of our country, and I've always been clear that I want to protect their rights. That is why I initially sought an agreement on this before we triggered Article 50. And it is why I'm making it an immediate priority at the beginning of the negotiations. But, Mr. Speaker, that agreement must be reciprocal, because we must protect the rights of UK citizens living in EU member states too. At the Council, I set out some of the principles that I believe should underlie that reciprocal agreement, and there was a very positive response from individual leaders and a strong sense of mutual goodwill in trying to reach such an agreement as soon as possible. So today, we are publishing detailed proposals to do exactly that. And let me set out the key points for the House. First, we want certainty. I know there's been some anxiety about what would happen to EU citizens at the point we leave the European Union. Today, I want to put that anxiety to rest. I want to completely reassure people that under these plans, no EU citizen currently in the UK lawfully will be asked to leave at the point the UK leaves the EU, We want you to stay. Second, any EU citizen in the UK with 5 years continuous residence at a specified cut-off date will be granted settled status. They will be treated as if they were UK citizens for healthcare, education, benefits and pensions. While any EU citizens with less than 5 years residence who have arrived before the specified cut-off date will be able to stay until they have the 5 years residence to apply for UK settled status. Third, the specified cut-off date will be the subject of discussions, but it will be no earlier than the date we triggered Article 50 and no later than the date we leave the EU. Fourth, no families will be split up. Family dependents who join a qualifying EU citizen here before the UK's exit will be able to apply for settled status after 5 years. And after the UK has left the European Union, EU citizens with settled status will be able to bring family members from overseas on the same terms as British nationals. Fifth, there will be no cliff edge. There will be a grace period of up to 2 years to allow people to regularise their status. While those EU citizens who arrived in the UK after the specified cut-off date will be allowed to remain in the UK for at least a temporary period and may still become eligible to settle permanently. Sixth, the system of registration that citizens go through will be as streamlined and light touch as possible, and we intend to remove some of the technical requirements currently needed to obtain permanent residence under EU rules. For example, we will not require anyone to demonstrate that they have held comprehensive sickness insurance. Seventh, we expect this offer to be extended on a reciprocal basis to nationals of Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, and the reciprocal agreement on citizens' rights will apply to the entire United Kingdom and Gibraltar. Eighth, this is all without prejudice to the common travel area arrangements that exist between the UK and Ireland. We will preserve the freedoms that UK and Irish nationals currently enjoy in each other's state, and Irish citizens will not need to apply for permanent residence to protect these entitlements. And finally, the UK will continue to export and uprate the UK state pension and provide associated healthcare cover within the EU. We will continue to protect the export of other benefits and associated healthcare cover where the individual is in receipt of those benefits on the specified cut-off date. And subject to negotiations, we want to continue participating in the European Health Insurance Card Scheme so that UK cardholders could continue to benefit from free or reduced cost healthcare while on a temporary stay in the EU, and vice versa for EU cardholders visiting the UK. Mr. Speaker, this is a fair and serious offer. Our obligations in the withdrawal treaty with the EU will be binding on the UK as a matter of international law, and we will incorporate commitments into UK law, guaranteeing that we will stand firmly by our part of the deal. So our offer will give those 3 million EU citizens in the UK certainty about the future of their lives, and a reciprocal agreement will provide the same certainty for the more than 1 million UK citizens who are living in the European Union. Mr. Speaker, 1 year on from that momentous decision to leave the European Union, let us remember what we are seeking to achieve with these negotiations. We are withdrawing from a system of treaties and bureaucracy that does not work for us. But we are not withdrawing from the values and solidarity that we share with our European neighbours. As a confident, outward-looking and self-governing nation, we know that it is not just our past that is entwined in the fortunes of our friends and neighbours, it is our future too. That is why we want this new, deep and special partnership, and it's why we approach these negotiations with optimism. Because a good deal for Britain and a good deal for Europe are not competing alternatives. They are the best single path to a brighter future for all our children and grandchildren. That, I believe, is the future the British people voted for. And that is the future I want us to secure, and I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, could I join you in thanking all staff of the House of Commons for all the work they did over the weekend to ensure that our electronic systems are safe, and I'd be grateful if you could pass that on to staff. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the advanced copy of the statement that we've just heard. 68 days ago, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and asked this country to give her a strong mandate to negotiate Brexit. She offered little by way of strategy or plan, more hollow sound bites and grandstanding, and the past 6 months the Prime Minister has stuck to her mantra, no deal is better than a bad deal, and continued with her threat to turn Britain into an offshore tax haven aimed at undercutting the European Union.
I know, that's what you said, though.
By ripping up regulation, hacking back public services and leading a race to the bottom in pay and conditions. Well, Mr. Speaker, the British people saw through that rhetoric, they saw through the threats, and instead of giving the Prime Minister the mandate she wanted, they rejected in large numbers the deregulated, low-wage future the Conservative Party has in mind for this country.
That's right.
She wanted a landslide and she lost her majority. Now her mandate is in tatters. But the Prime Minister still insists she's the best person to get a good deal for Britain. And incredibly believes she is the best person to strike a deal with the very people she spent the last 6 months threatening and hectoring.
Yeah.
The truth is this country needs a new approach to Brexit that a Tory government simply cannot deliver. They're taking Britain down a reckless path, prepared to put jobs and living standards at risk just to maintain support within her own party and keep her government in office. The cracks are already beginning to appear. While some in her party want to move towards Labour's approach to Brexit, at least in terms of protecting jobs, trade and the economy, the hard right voices in her cabinet and on her backbenches are still determined to force Britain over a cliff edge.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister needs to ignore them. She needs now to listen. So I ask her, has she promised to restore supremacy to this Parliament? Will she now be more transparent and involve it properly in the Brexit negotiation process? And will she now finally rule out the possibility of no deal being a viable option for this country?
Yes.
Choice is hers. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister went to Brussels last week to make what she described as a generous offer to EU nationals in this country. The truth is, it's too little, too late. That could have been done and should have been done a year ago when Labour put that very proposal to the House of Commons. But by making an offer only after negotiations have begun, the Prime Minister has dragged the issue of citizens and families deep into the complex and delicate negotiations of our future trade relations with the European Union, which she herself has been willing to say may result in failure. This isn't a generous offer. This is confirmation the government is prepared to use people as bargaining chips. So can the Prime Minister now confirm what will happen to her offer to nationals in this country if no deal is reached? What happens to the rights of family reunion which EU citizens are currently entitled to? Does the Prime Minister envisage the 5-year period EU nationals must accumulate here in Britain will also be the same for British citizens who want to retain the right to live in other parts of the European Union? And can the Prime Minister tell the House if these proposals were drawn up to take into account the impact on our public services, especially the National Health Service, where there is great concern over falling numbers of nurses and doctors already? Mr. Speaker, what makes this situation more remarkable is what we learned this weekend from the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, that immediately after last year's referendum, the government was willing to give assurances to EU nationals in this country. However, that was blocked in the Cabinet by the Prime Minister herself. This is people's lives we're talking about. Our neighbours, friends, husbands, wives, children. The Prime Minister clearly didn't care about them then. Why should they believe she cares about them now? Mr. Speaker, the country needs a change of direction. People are tired of tough talk from a weak government and a weak Prime Minister. The government needs to listen, put the national interest first and deliver a Brexit for the many, not the few, one that puts jobs, the economy and living standards first, by building a new partnership with the European Union on the basis of common interests and common values, one that protects living standards and promotes human rights through new trade deals throughout the world. That is what Labour would do. The Prime Minister has no mandate at home and no mandate abroad. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that it would only be a Labour government that works for the whole country that could deliver a Brexit that works for all and protects those jobs and living standards that are at risk while this government remains in office?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The right honourable gentleman has talked about a variety of issues there. He talked about Parliament and transparency. We've been very clear that there will be a vote in this Parliament on the deal that has been negotiated with the European Union, and we expect that to take place before the European Parliament has an opportunity to vote on it. And there will be many opportunities in legislation and other ways coming in the coming weeks and months for Parliament to make its views known on these various matters. Now, let me come on to the position that the right honourable gentleman referred to in relation to workers' rights. We're very clear, as I was in the objectives that I set out in the Lancaster House speech in January, as I have continued to set out in the Article 50 letter and elsewhere, that we want to protect workers' rights. Indeed, we want to enhance workers' rights. He talks about no plan. I set out our objectives in that Lancaster House speech and in the Article 50 letter and have continued to set out those objectives, whereas the Labour Party's had 7 plans on Brexit in 9 months. We've got members of the Labour Party front bench, the Shadow Home Secretary, the Shadow Chief Secretary, the Shadow Attorney General, who want to retain free movement. We've got 35 Labour MPs who want to retain membership of the single market. Neither of these, as far as I'm aware, were actually in the Labour Party manifesto that people stood on at the last election. And then we get on to the whole issue. We get on to the issue of the negotiations on EU citizens and their rights here in the United Kingdom. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that I find it bizarre, if not worrying, that in the position he holds, he is willing to stand in this House and say he has no care for UK citizens living in the European Union. Because that is what he is saying. I said at an early stage that we wanted to address the EU citizens' rights issue early. The European Union were clear that there was no negotiation before notification. It is one of the first issues that we are addressing after notification. They were clear it had to be undertaken on a reciprocal basis, and they were clear that whatever the United Kingdom said, the European Union would still be arguing about its proposals in relation to the protection of rights for EU citizens. So people who say that we should be not dealing on this as a reciprocal basis simply don't understand what negotiations are about, because the other side will be negotiating on these issues. He talks about the issue of no deal or being better than a bad deal. I'll tell him what I worry about in terms of a bad deal. I worry about those who appear to suggest in Europe that we should be punished in some sense for leaving the European Union. And I worry about those here, and from what he says, I think the Leader of the Opposition is in this particular camp, who says we should take any deal, regardless of the bill and regardless of the circumstances. He would negotiate the worst deal with the biggest possible bill. And then finally, can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about wanting a future relationship based on a partnership of values, of shared values, with trade deals across the world.
In the last hour, Theresa May has outlined her plan for EU nationals living in the UK after Brexit. The plan guarantees permanent rights on residency, healthcare, education, employment, benefits and pensions for 3.2 million EU citizens who have been in the UK for 5 years. Let's go live to Westminster and speak to our senior political correspondent, Beth Rigby, who is standing by for us this afternoon. Hello to you, Beth. As anticipated?
Yes, Kay, as anticipated, in that quite a comprehensive offer here from the Prime Minister for citizens already in the UK. So as you were saying, there's all sorts of things in here. If you're already here and you qualify for this settled status, and that means you will have been a resident here for 5 years at the cut-off point, which they haven't set out yet, but the cut-off date for applications to have settled status in the UK. But basically, EU citizens living here that want to stay, they'll still get all the rights they already have, so they can still send child benefit abroad, for example. That might be a bit controversial with some of Theresa May's Brexiteers. They have the pension rights guaranteed, access to healthcare guaranteed. They can also bring family members over. But one thing, Kay, that was interesting about this is that the Prime Minister is guaranteeing the rights for EU citizens to bring family members over before this cut-off date, which the government haven't yet said when that is. But after that, you won't be able to bring family members over if you're an EU citizen after that cut-off point, after we leave the EU. Instead, you'll have to apply and they will have the same immigration status as anyone else. Now, that could be a bone of contention with the European Commission. They explicitly said that EU citizens should be able to bring over family members in the future. And another bone of contention will be who oversees these rights, Kay. The European Commission very clear that they wanted the European Court of Justice to protect and oversee and interpret the rights of EU citizens living in the UK. Theresa May adamant in her statement that the jurisdiction of the ECJ will not apply in the UK, and it will be British courts that protect these people. So she's put forward her deal. It's very comprehensive in terms of the rights guaranteed for existing EU nationals here, but there are two big bones of contention, I would argue, between the UK and the EU, and it matters, Kay, because the Prime Minister really needs to try and nail down this deal, not least for the 3.2 million people living here that want certainty, but also she can't get on to the stuff about a future trade deal until she's nailed down this deal on citizens' rights.
Bones of contention that you talk about, Beth?
The bones of contention?
Yes.
Yeah, the big bone of contention will be, as I said, the jurisdiction of who gets to protect EU citizens here. Is it British courts or the European Court? That will go down pretty badly in Brussels. Look, Kay, the point was, when she put down this offer in Brussels last Thursday at the European Council, she obviously thought it was a comprehensively good deal. And European partners were a bit less enthusiastic, a bit more tepid, shall we say. So now she's actually laid out the details in this 15-page document. We're all waiting to see what they say. I imagine issues around the ECJ and issues around family dependence of EU citizens in the future being able to come to the UK will be two areas where she will not have met her European counterparts at the point where they feel they can do a deal, but we'll have to see what they say.
Understood, Beth. Thanks for the clarification. Speak to you soon. Thanks a lot. Let's bring in our senior correspondent, Michelle Clifford, who's standing by in Brussels for us. So we're just hearing there from Beth that this was touted last week as part of the negotiations. Tepid reception then. Likely to be any different now?
Well, I think that the European leaders, and particularly the European Commission, will welcome seeing the detail in this document. Last week, they said they wanted to go through this line by line, and they'll be receiving the document just as we have. Donald Tusk had said last week that what Theresa May had on the table was below expectation, so they will want to analyse this. But I just heard some of what Beth was saying, and she's absolutely right. I'm looking here at page 4, and that's the first, or one of the first points that I know there'll be a massive bone of contention, where it says here the Court of Justice of the European Union, the ECJ, will not have jurisdiction in the UK will not have jurisdiction over EU citizens' rights. Now, that's a red line for the hard Brexiteers in the UK. It's a red line over here too. The European Union 27 saying that the European Court of Justice should have jurisdiction over EU citizens. So they'll be fighting pretty hard on that one. I think there are, in the document, some areas where there still are questions. There is that issue of dependents. If they come over after Brexit, they will be subject to the same immigration rules as anyone else from any other country, and that's something that the EU members are going to be very unhappy about. They believe any EU citizen who was in the UK before Brexit, their dependents should have rights to join them, and that those individuals should have rights to healthcare and pensions and education, all the rest of it in perpetuity. So I think there will be plenty in here that the EU members will be not very happy about. And certainly I spoke to Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council. I spoke to some of his people this morning, and they reiterated what he said last week, that they want Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator, to go through this document line by line. David Davis will be returning here in a couple of weeks for one of the first big sessions with Michel Barnier. EU rights are going to be the priority on the table, along with the Irish border, what's going to happen there, and that big issue of the exit bill. There is certainly a lot still to argue about, but if they can't agree on this, because it's the area that they have most in common, then it doesn't bode well, does it, Kay, for the other areas of contention?
It does not. Michelle, for now, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
I've been getting away with it all